Okay, so talking today about ethical and legal issues in abnormal psychology. Okay, so the code of ethics that applies to all individuals in psychology is created by the American Psychological Association, or the APA. And the APA has come up with ethical standards. So these are standards that professionals are held to. And there are a number of different areas where these ethical standards apply. So these are some examples here with resolving ethical issues, competence, human relations, privacy and confidentiality, advertising, and other public statements. We'll talk about some of these today, but certainly not all of them. The ethics code is very long. It's quite exhaustive. I encourage you to definitely check it out as part of your supplemental readings for this week. So the APA Ethics Code also then covers things about record keeping and fees, ongoing education and training, and minimal standards for this within the discipline of psychology, standards for conducting research and publishing research, standards for assessment, and then finally standards for treatment and psychotherapy. Okay, so looking at the standard for competence. So according to the APA ethical guidelines, psychologists have the competence. So this means that they have the skill set to be able to assess, to conceptualize, and to provide interventions for clients. So making an assessment, remember we talked about that way back at the beginning of the semester. They can come up with a case conceptualization. This is basically your idea about, what you think is actually going on with this client based on your assessment, based on your work with this individual client. And then designing some kind of intervention. What's your treatment plan? What particular approach to treatment do you plan to use for this particular client? There are some kind of sticky areas in relation to competencies that are required when they're, facing very, very particular situations. So, for example, in courts. So if you plan to go into forensic psychology, you want to work in the legal system in any way, there are some additional competencies, additional training that you must receive in order to become what they call an expert witness, or to provide this kind of expert testimony within a court. This is basically, is this person competent to stand trial, and things of that nature. So if you're interested in that, definitely check out the additional training that you need to get to be able to have this particular position. Also, psychologists can be used in court in evaluating child protection issues. So let's say that you are asked by the courts to determine if this child's parents are fit. Are they providing what this particular child needs? And so to be competent in that area, you also need to undergo some additional training as well. Okay, so informed consent, something else that, we can take from research, right? So if you've taken a research methods course, you've heard about informed consent. It happens in therapy as well. So when you go to see a therapist, when you go to see a psychologist in particular, that psychologist should provide you, before you even begin the process, with an informed consent document. So the statement then, this informed consent document will have the goals of treatment, the actual process of therapy, so what is actually going to happen in therapy, what are your rights as a client, and your rights as a client are very similar actually to your rights as a research participant. You can leave at any time, right, without penalty. Your information is kept confidential except under some very strict circumstances, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. There are also responsibilities that the therapist has to you. So this can be something as mundane as, we'll contact you at least 12 hours before we need to cancel an appointment. But it can also be something a little bit more grand. Let's say also that, this therapist will work with you on outlining these particular treatment goals. We will review the treatment goals at least once a month to see how we are actually progressing here. The particular risks that are involved in treatment. So when you undergo treatment through psychotherapy, you're going to be probably talking about a lot of very sensitive topics, right? And some individuals might not feel that they're emotionally ready to be able to delve into that kind of information. So that could be a potential risk of participating in psychotherapy. The particular techniques that the therapist will use. So some people practice psychoanalytic therapy, so they might be looking at things like dream interpretation and free association as particular techniques, whereas some people might fall more on the behavioral side and they use exposure therapy techniques. So the client should know about those things so that they can make the decision, do I want to participate in this or not? And then other things here as well. So what is the fee? Is it on a sliding scale? Is it, through your insurance? Is it basic fee for service? What are we going to charge you? When is payment due also? And then finally, the limits of confidentiality, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. Okay, so confidentiality. All right, so confidentiality is one of the hallmarks of psychotherapy, of treatment, right? Of that relationship, that therapeutic alliance that exists between the client and the therapist. So confidentiality means that what you say to your psychologist stays between the two of you. It is not shared with anyone unless you, the client, gives written permission. That's called signing a release of information. Unless you as the client give written permission to have your psychologist share that information with other people. Now, of course, this applies to adults mostly. With children, there are some special laws here that come into play as well. With children, obviously, parents or primary caregivers are going to be very involved, and so they will need to be, updated on what's going on regularly. But by and large, what you say to your psychologist stays confidential. It stays between the two of you, except in some very special situations, which we'll talk about here. Okay, so looking at confidentiality in the legal system, we can talk about privileged communication, and that's what the legal system calls that confidentiality that exists between the client and the therapist. Their communication, so them talking to each other, the client and therapist, that is privileged communication. It is on a need-to-know basis, and most people don't need to know, right? So within the courtroom then, a psychologist cannot disclose client information without the client's expressed permission, okay? So the client has to say, yes, it's fine if you want to share, the story of, how my entire family, burned to death in a horrific fire and I've been dealing with this for the last 25 years. That's fine. You can share that. There are some exceptions, though, to confidentiality. So, for example, in custody cases, we might have to talk about what is actually being said to determine which parent, which guardian should have custody of this particular child. And then also if the client is using the mental disability defense. So if the client is saying that, okay, I committed X, Y, and Z crime because of my mental state, the psychologist obviously has to share that information about the client's mental disability with the court in order for the case to proceed. Additionally, in cases involving abuse, there are some exceptions to confidentiality here as well. So you may have heard this term before as a mandated reporter. So mandated reporting basically applies to anyone who works with minors. So anyone who works with children who are under the age of 18. So this includes social workers, psychologists, therapists, teachers. Anyone who works with kids under the age of 18 is a mandated reporter, in that if they have a reasonable suspicion that this child is experiencing abuse, you are required by law to call some kind of hotline. I'm not sure what it is in New Mexico, but in other states where I've worked, it's children and youth services or children and family services, child line. All of these are different names. It's basically a service. You call a 1-800 number. You can make an anonymous report to a professional on the other end. You describe the child, you describe why you suspect that there is abuse going on, and then once you've made the report, you're usually all set, you're good to go, because the person on the other line will then investigate that particular report. So what they do then, they'll send a social worker out to the home, out to the school where this particular child is, and they will follow up to see, is abuse actually going on, and then based on that, they will make some recommendations on what to do, where to go from here. So with mandated reporting then, the purpose of it is to protect children, right? To protect them from this abuse potential here, but also, if there is abuse going on, to allow us to be able to intervene, to actually do something to stop the abuse, and then also to deter abusers. If they know that this is in place, they might be less likely then to continue engaging in abuse. Okay, last thing about confidentiality here. Confidentiality can be broken when there is what's called a duty to warn or otherwise protect. Okay, so psychologists then are bound by this ethical standard where they have to warn someone if your client, so let's say that you're a psychologist, you meet with your client tells you, I am so angry right now, I am going to kill my girlfriend. That's what I'm going to do. I've had it up to here with her. I'm done. I'm going to kill her. Your client has just stated harmful intentions, right? And identified a specific person. So that's the caveat here as well. If your client's like, you know what, I'm going to kill someone. That's not a specific person, right? That does not warrant you breaking confidentiality as the psychologist. But since your client has said to you, I am so upset with my girlfriend, I'm going to kill her. Your client's identified a specific person. You must then break confidentiality, and it is your duty to warn this person that someone else has expressed a harmful intention, that they actually want to do harm to this person. So of course, you would call the police, you would make a report in that way. So by and large then, confidentiality exists to a very, very strong degree, right, within the client-therapist relationship, and it's only broken in very, very extreme circumstances. Okay, let's talk about my favorite, multiple relationships. So this is a fun one, right? So multiple relationships, this means that you have multiple roles with the same person. So applied to psychology, you might be someone's psychologist, and let's say that you're this person's psychologist, and this person also works at the daycare where you take your children. That's a multiple relationship, right? In one role, this person is your client. In the other role, this person is your child's daycare provider. That's problematic, right? Problematic in the sense that there is some potential here for a conflict of interest, right? For some kind of harm, possibly for some kind of exploitation. So let's take that same example and say that you might start to, let's say, take advantage of the fact that this person is your client and also your daycare provider by showing up 45 minutes late now to pick up your kid. And you know that this woman, let's say it's, one of your female clients, you know that she'll stay there, right, past the time when she's supposed to be leaving, because you're the only psychologist in town, and she doesn't want to piss you off, and so she's going to stay there because she wants to keep seeing you as a psychologist. You are then exploiting that relationship, right? You are exploiting the power that you have in that particular relationship, and that is not fair, right? That is not an ethical thing to be doing. Multiple relationships, obviously the most serious egregious here is psychologists having sexual relations with their clients. Although this is glamorized in the movies, it really doesn't happen often in practice. Most psychologists are really good at setting boundaries. So this means, having a clear delineation between your professional life and your personal life. Just taking this in context here, if you practice, and this goes for any kind of, human service job where confidentiality is an issue, if you practice in a small area, you will likely have multiple relationships with clients. I'll give you an example. When I was a family therapist, I practiced in actually a pretty big area. So at the time I was a family therapist, and then I was also waiting tables on the weekends, right, to make some extra money. And one day, it's a Friday night, things are kind of crazy, waiting tables, right, in the restaurant, and I see that the table that I have just gotten is an entire family that I worked with as a family therapist. So my clients are sitting in my section. Oh my God. I was beside myself. I just thought, oh my God, what am I supposed to do? And I, quickly grabbed another server and I said, hey, I can't take this table. I'm so busy right now. Can you take it for me? And then I'll take your next one. So I thought that I'd done a pretty good job, of being able to separate out that relationship, right, from my waitressing life and my professional life. But then, walking past the table, the family then wanted to sit there and talk with me about therapy related things when I was waiting tables. Oh God, it was horrible. So I very quickly had to say, you know what, I will see you guys next week for our appointment. I can't really talk about this stuff right now. So you then, as the practitioner, need to understand these boundaries and try to deal with them the best that you can. But understand that it's not always going to be easy, and you will indefinitely see your clients out somewhere and have to deal with them in more of a social arena as opposed to a therapeutic arena.